Hey there, welcome to this instrument tutorial for the drums. I'm Evan, and today we're just going to be talking about a few different things with dynamics, playing with microphones, personal style, versus playing with a track, and some things like that. So I want to start with dynamics. I think this is probably where drummers get the most grief, is about playing too loud. So there is a time and a place for playing loud and for playing soft, and so you always want to be aware of when those times are. And so we'll use a song "Who You Say I Am" today as an example. So the intro, it's very soft. I'm just on the ride cymbal like that, just playing soft, simple parts. I don't really start to come in full force until that chorus, when I kind of wash on the crash cymbals a little bit more. And so you can see there's a gradual crescendo, if I can use a musical term, of building from kind of a mezzo piano state to more of a mezzo forte state. As a drummer, your dynamic control sets the mood for the song and informs the band, other band members, as well as the congregation, how this section of the song is supposed to feel and what it's supposed to sound like. So don't take so much grief when you hear that you're playing too loud. You might just need to make an adjustment to your dynamics and play loud in certain areas and softer in others, so that when you do play loud, it has more impact. Let's move on and talk about playing drums that are mic'd. It's a little bit different than playing open air without any microphones. That involves a lot more dynamic control, and you really do need to bring it down like 1 to 2 dynamic levels when you're playing without microphones. But if you're playing in a more controlled environment like we do here, then you can afford to play a little bit more fastly and loosely with dynamics and achieve higher highs and lower lows because you have the microphones supporting you. So playing with microphones, it's important to realize that the microphones aren't there to make you louder. They're there to actually control the volume level and to control you in the mix. So playing with microphones puts you at a great advantage for achieving good sound control. And so whenever you play with a mic'd kit, it's important to keep that in mind and not shy away from playing too loud because you have the microphones. A lot of people look at a microphone and think amplification, when you should look at a microphone and think about control. And so remember that the mics are there to actually help you. They're not there to limit your volume level. So, like for instance, when I'm playing, a verse, the verse groove for "Who You Say I Am" on the toms, and I'll play with the brushes here so I don't blow out the microphone. We're talking about a pretty mezzo forte kind of tom groove. Kind of like that, okay? Now, I'm not shying away from playing that, even though it's a verse, because I've got those microphones there to help control me from getting too loud and from overpowering the vocalists, the guitars, the keys, all the other layers in the band. So in talking about dynamics and the level we play at, let's also talk about the different parts of the kit we use for different parts of the song. So a worship song generically will have a pretty similar structure across the board. You have an intro, a verse, a chorus, another verse, a set of choruses, an instrumental, a set of bridges, and a chorus to end on. There's some variation and some differences in there, and we play a couple of songs that have 2 bridges, and some songs have no bridge at all. But dynamically, you're going to follow a fairly formulaic structure. And so, depending on the song you're playing, you might not be in at all at the beginning, or if you are at the beginning, sometimes, depending on the energy level of the song, I like to start out with either a nice strong beat, coming in like right away with like a wash on the crash. When you wash on the crash, that kind of helps match the feeling of keys and guitars swelling into an intro, and that helps create energy for the very beginning of the song. So I'm gonna wash on the crash a little bit, and come in with a nice strong beat. for the intro of the song. So that's an option we have right there, utilizing the ride, the crashes, kick and snare, keeping it simple, minimal amount of fills. You don't want to distract in the intro with fills. You kind of want to establish the feel of the song right away instead of doing a crazy fill. There are times where it's appropriate to do that, but more often than not, you want to set up a nice establishing beat with either the cymbals and the snare or with a tom groove. And if you can impact at the beginning, a tom groove is a great way to do that. And so again, we might start off with like a simple wash on the crash. And again, we're trying to focus on the floor tom here, or if you have two floor toms, in my case, the floor toms, as the area of focus to really establish the beat. We're going to have a nice driving quarter note kick pattern, something really simple that helps establish the beat. And we use the rack tom to help kind of splash and add as an accent. And so those are two ways you can start a song. And then after that, we can either move to a simplified version of the tom groove of 2 dynamic levels down, or we can, if we're starting with a beat, we can do a simple fill and go into a simple groove like this, utilizing the hi-hat, the kick, and the snare. Sometimes a tambourine if you've got it, depending on if it's appropriate or not. Anything with a sharp frequency like a tambourine or a crash, you want to use those pretty discerningly and usually sparingly at the beginning of a song. Again, you don't want to distract from the beginning of the song. You want it to be established and steady. So let's move on to the chorus. There's a couple options here for the chorus. Depending on the feel of the song, you might play at a fairly high dynamic level in the verse, only to break down in the chorus. In which case, an eighth note crescendo build is most appropriate for getting into that, because we want to kind of build the tension and then release it with the crash to just focus on the lyrics in the chorus. And so a way you can achieve that is by sizzling the hi-hats with the snare and adding the kick drum. Another way you can do it is to do a fill and then crash into the fill and use the floor tom. There's a couple different ways you can do that. And then the simpler the entrance to the chorus, the better. It's like slamming on the brakes when you're going down a hill, but then you let off the brake a little bit once you start to slow down, so that way you don't jerk to a stop. It's kind of in the sense like that. You're letting off the brakes a little bit so that you kind of roll to a gentle stop. So think of it in that way when you're using dynamics. Choruses are usually the hook. That's the part of the song that people are going to remember the most easily. So you want to have a beat that's strong and driving, that doesn't take away from that hook, that contributes to it even. And so I find that the simpler, the better in the chorus. You want to utilize crashes every 8 to 12 beats, no more than every 8, because then it just starts to sound like you're wailing on the crash cymbals and it's too much. But you want to align your crashes with impactful lyrics, like in Who You Say I Am, who the sun sets free. You want to really align your crashes with the most impactful lyrical lines of the chorus. Bridges, instrumentals, there are a lot of different things you can do. In Who You Say I Am, we actually go into this really nice driving eighth note build that utilizes the ride, the kick, and the snare. We're crescendoing, and then we're coming back down, and we're crescendoing again throughout that section. And so you'll start with just kind of build. It's important to start soft so you have a dynamic ceiling to hit like that. The only other section to really talk about in this song is the instrumental, which we have kind of an extended instrumental that flows back into the bridge. For that, there's a couple of options. The track does it a little bit differently than how I do it. They kind of focus on like a tom groove But I find that with our band and with the style that we play in, it doesn't really work as much. So I actually go for a little bit more of a kind of an alternative rock feel with that. So I do a nice simple fill into just a little bit more dressed up version of the 6/8 beat I'm doing in the chorus. So kind of like that. And the reason why I do that is because sometimes we have fewer instruments. Sometimes we don't. We don't always utilize all the tracks, which is a good thing. But we also sometimes we don't have sufficient low end to support those toms. So it's important to be discerning in recognizing what kind of band members do you have available to play with you. Obviously, the goal is to always have a bass player, but sometimes we don't always have a bass player. And so we need sometimes to make soft adjustments for that. And so an adjustment I like to make, even with a bass player, is to play kind of in that style because it keeps the energy up. Especially if this song is mid-set, it keeps the energy up and it prevents the song from kind of falling flat because we're lacking those extra instruments that the original recording has to give it that kind of substance. And it's important to recognize also that I'm doing all this in 6/8 time right now, but all of these things still apply to 4/4, 3/4, any other time signature you might be in. You just have to adjust them for the note values that you have and for the tempo and time signature that you're in. So you'll notice that I have kind of branched out and created some of my own parts for this song. And it's important to, when you're playing, you don't want to lose your style. You do want to be as true to the original track as you can be, but I think there is a benefit as well in injecting your personal style into playing. And so, for me, my style has kind of evolved in a way that it often does mirror a lot of worship drumming, but I also have other influences too from punk rock, alternative rock, metal, classical music, orchestral music. There are other genres that influence how I play, and so allow those things to seep in to how you play, because they can be a great benefit to you, to where you're not feeling like you're just reciting a part. At the end of the day, you can actually inject your own personal style into how you play. And so look for opportunities to do that while honoring the feel of the song, and you'll have a much more worshipful experience, but also just as a musician, a much more fulfilling experience as well. Listen to music that you like, listen to worship music, and start to see how those styles fit together. And growing up when I was in youth group, I played a lot more rock and roll style, and worship was more of that style. Kind of pop rock. It's actually a lot of fun now when I get to incorporate some of those more pop rock styles into worship because they're not as commonly seen. And so whenever we get a chance to do that, it's always a good time. And so, but in a lot of ways, if we learn a new song, I'll have to hear it and think, okay, this is kind of in that worship drum style, the big toms, epic crashes, big, fat, thick snare tones. And so I think, how can I take my personal influences and my personal style and combine it with what the track is doing? And so I think that's a good way to kind of develop a personal style and kind of how I've had to develop my own personal style as times have changed in worship music. And eventually they will change again. And we'll look back on this as like, man, remember when worship music used to sound like this? And we'll get kind of that nostalgia of getting to return to those styles in the future. And so it's always important to be changing and to be flexible with how genres change and develop over the years. So with personal style also comes communication with the rest of your band. As the drummer, you're kind of holding things down, and even if there's a click track in everyone's ear, everyone is still going to be kind of playing off of you as the drummer. And so it's important to make sure you're in sync with your other band members. I would say, first and foremost, you need to be in sync with your bass player at all times. you and your bassist need to be on the same page dynamically and rhythmically. The more that your bassist can sync up his or her parts with your kick drum, with your bass drum parts, the more cohesive the music is going to sound. And when you go for certain parts, if the band is in sync with you, it's not going to sound like you're showboating with a big triplet fill if the rest of the band kind of plays a triplet feel alongside your triplet fill. Or if you go for like a stylized chorus, like I like to do sometimes for a final chorus, if we've built up really big and dynamically I'm about to hit the ceiling, and I want to just start hitting the crash on quarter notes, if you've got your electric guitars, your basses coming along and playing and strumming their chords in sync with how you play, then the music sounds more cohesive. And it's also important to maintain eye contact, look around the stage. Usually as the drummer you're going to be in the back, and so you're kind of looking at the backs of everyone and the sides of everyone, but as much as you can, make eye contact with the other musicians so that way you can kind of signal your intent and what you're going to do. I like to gesture by raising my arms up, and that kind of tells the rest of the band, okay, we're dynamically about to do something pretty big here. But then if I start washing on the cymbals and leaning forward, then they know that I'm kind of letting off the brakes to roll to a stop. And so using body language to help communicate to the rest of your band is important. And so learn what that is for you and communicate it in rehearsal, in sound check to your other bandmates. Say, hey, when we get to this section of the song, I'm going to do this. That's the cue to move into this part. So that kind of communication is really important.